I'm Kevin Rinke, and I'd like to welcome you to Beyond the Echo. I ran for governor in Michigan. After losing that election, my desire to look at issues that are important to the state or the country grew. There is so much static. There are so many opinions. Our news stations have gotten to the point where we don't know what news is anymore. Where do you go to get real facts? This is about real perspective for you. Beyond the Echo will cut through all the smoke, all the opinions. It's not about Republicans. It's not about Democrats. It's about the issues and what are real. Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Beyond the Echo. I'm Kevin Rinke, and this morning I have James Dickson with me, who I have followed for many, many years. He ran a program called Michigan Insider, and it was out of Lansing on politics. And it's a guy that, through his journalistic career, I've always enjoyed his perspective, and it's a real pleasure to meet you today.
Hey, good
James.
to meet you, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. I'm looking forward to a conversation on a whole bunch of issues and to see your perspective.
Absolutely.
Recently, you wrote an article, and it was about Honda and why Honda would not ever consider building a factory in building cars in Detroit or in Michigan in general. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so as we reindustrialize, you would think that this is going to benefit Michigan. We built the middle class in Michigan. We put the world on wheels in Michigan. It makes sense that the town that was Motor City when I was still a kid, I'm 41 now, and in my lifetime, we were still the Motor City. Mm-hmm. And so the thought is that, with Trump, reindustrialization, that would all benefit us. But that's not necessarily the case, as we're seeing. And so that not quite State of the Union speech that Trump gave kind of opened my eyes, because he's talking about the need to reindustrialize, make America build again, and the one specific he had for jobs that were going to be created was Honda in Indiana. And I just thought it's so sad that Michigan, we finally have help in the White House. For 3 decades, it was like previously. It was like, we've had the NAFTA regime. We've had the free trade regime. We've given away our Motor City status. And this is the first guy talking differently about that. And when jobs are created, they're bypassing Michigan to go to Indiana.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, so last year, or not last year, but in 2023, after being a right-to-work state for a decade, Gretchen Whitmer repeals that law, signs the repeal. And so now if you want to set up auto jobs in Michigan, there's a chance you could have to negotiate with Shawn Fain and the UAW. Because if your plant selects to be unionized, now you're negotiating with Shawn Fain. Now you're negotiating with the man who doesn't want to get a good deal for his members. He wants a global general strike in 2028. It's not a prosperity mentality, and that's who we've locked ourselves in the room with.
It's so interesting to me because, like you, in my lifetime, my family's history is tied to the automotive industry.
The auto industry, yes.
Absolutely. And there was a time when Detroit was the third wealthiest city in America. There was a time when Detroit had 3.2 million residents. And today we have 585,000 residents. And I talk about leadership often. And you have to create an environment for the people you lead to be successful in. Your perspective on the environment that has evolved regarding manufacturing, regarding the middle class in Michigan, let's say since, could we go back to the 70s even? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
That was the peak. That was the peak, the 70s. I think that was the peak manufacturing. We still had some strong population. We still had representation in Congress, and we carried a lot of weight back then. We had even a president at one point in the White House who was from Michigan in the 70s.
I worked for him.
Did you really?
Yeah, I was his personal aide.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Well, I want to hear that story sometime when you're on my podcast.
There you go. I like that.
Because that's absolutely fascinating to me. But yeah. So things are, so back then, the 70s, the challenge is quality in the auto industry. And then you have the foreign companies coming in, Japanese vehicles, better made at that point in time. American quality is bottoming out. So those two things tilt the market over. But then when you embrace the free trade mentality, we don't just have this quality perception that formed years ago. Now it's also cheaper to bypass Michigan and bypass America entirely. And so when Ross Perot talked about that giant sucking sound, that was jobs leaving here for Mexico.
Yeah.
And you might even have to pack up the machines that you worked on and put them in the box for Mexico.
See, I often think that NAFTA was a byproduct of trying to punish the radical side of unions. And I was a big fan of Ronald Reagan, but I'm not a fan of NAFTA.
No.
And that concept of sacrificing the middle class is what has made America great. The middle class is what makes America strong.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, when we have a strong middle class, the extremes that say, class warfare and the extremes that say reject businesses are diminished because people are proud, they're working, they're providing for their families, they're living in their communities
Right.
and enjoying the largesse that America offers to people. And NAFTA was the start. I choked when I heard people that I admired say, we're going to evolve to a service economy. And that was a mea culpa.
It never made sense.
Well,
What I find fascinating, whether it's
it
COVID
did to
policy
them.
or deindustrialization, is that these things you could say, fog of war or whatever, and years later we learn things. But if you look at the arguments they were making then, they didn't make sense. So it was basically saying we're going to go from a proven model to something that may happen. What happens when you have a bird in your hand and you try to grab for the two birds in the bush?
Yep, you lose the bird in your hand.
You lose the bird in your hand, and so there's 3 birds available, and you wound up with 0. And that's what we did. There was not a realistic replacement that was ever going to happen. And so what did happen, it's funny because industry didn't go away. It just left America.
Absolutely.
And so we built Mexico as to the extent it is a viable economy outside of drugs. That's us. That's U.S. policy. There was a time, I think 1989, Tiananmen Square happened. China was about as wealthy as Egypt back then. We built China. We let them into the World Trade Organization. We said China, a place with no respect for humanity. Forget human rights. Let's talk about humanity. Let's talk about the human being. We decided that they should be manufacturer to the world rather than overpay our neighbors, rather than negotiate with a union leader who might be a pain in the butt, but his members, maybe his son marries your daughter someday.
Yeah. I don't believe that the cost of manufacturing in America is that significant when you figure the shipping, when you figure the tariff scenario.
How could it be?
When you figure all of the consequences. And it disappointed me then.
Mm-hmm.
It disappointed me now. And again, I go back to, I think NAFTA was a form of punishment where the government said, you know what? We're tired of arguing with the unions. So we'll just pick up our toys and go somewhere else. And the American people, under the guise the American people will benefit from it, which they didn't. Very, very interesting that, you talked about quality is the reason for the exodus. When Toyota partnered with GM in Fremont, California, they produced the highest quality manufactured cars in America. Toyota was following the manufacturing guidelines of Edward Deming, who was a special employee of the U.S. government that was sent to Japan to rebuild manufacturing after World War II, who the big three rejected because Edward Deming believed in the power of the worker, in the ability of that worker to make decisions.
As opposed to bargaining collectively?
As opposed to bargaining collectively, as opposed to identifying problems but trying to fix them later versus fixing them immediately. And the key element from a simplistic view for manufacturing was on a Toyota manufacturing line, a worker that spots a problem, that sees a problem, has the ability to shut the whole line down and they fix it immediately. They're rewarded. At the time on U.S. manufacturing lines, they were punished because U.S. manufacturing philosophy said it's too expensive to shut the line down. We'll just build 10,000 cars today that don't work and we'll fix them later.
Figure it out later.
Yeah. And
it's more work when we have to fix them later.
Yeah, which is crazy.
It's a perverse form of job security.
Let's fast forward to today, because we talk about Indiana, we talk about Tennessee, we talk about Florida often. And on the Republican side of things, we use them as beacons of success. Talk to me, Dave, about those environments, those unique characteristics in those states versus the environment that Michigan currently has.
Well, what we've done, my old colleague, when I was at the Mackinac Center, James Homan, one of the most, if you want to talk fiscal policy in Michigan,
I love James.
James Homan is the absolute guy. He posted a chart that just that blew my mind. So basically, there was little corporate welfare in the early 2000s. So coming out of the 90s, 2000, it was not as much of a thing under John Engler. Then Granholm takes office in 2003. Corporate welfare numbers go way up. And so rather than try to fix the things in the economy that caused people to flee, or the things in the business climate that caused people to flee, the consensus formed in Lansing will just pay GM, Ford, Chrysler, and eventually even a company like Goshen will pay you to create jobs, corporate welfare. And that and the headlines it generated led some people to the impression that Michigan was actually doing well. Because if every job announcement you saw the GM CEO's name, not right now, Mary Barra, and then the same line you saw Gretchen Whitmer's name, the average person is going to think that the governor plays some causal role possibly in every job in Michigan. Couldn't be further from true. And so what they do is they use corporate welfare to paper over a bad environment for businesses. You're a businessman. If you have, 10,000 employees under your aegis, do you want to move them to a state that can't educate their kids? Do I want to open a factory in a place that might not be able to keep the lights on? And in 2040 is planning to run on solar panels and windmills. Do I want to have to maybe negotiate with the Shawn Fain? It seems like Michigan does everything that would drive people away rather than keeping them here. And to make up for it, we hand out big checks. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Hasn't worked.
Let's talk about Shawn Fain for a second.
Yeah.
And let's talk about electric vehicles. And there are those that might call him a son of a bitch when it comes to negotiations. He is a radical dude.
We wouldn't, but there's people who certainly would.
I certainly would never call him a son of a bitch, nor would I think it. But there are those that might. I scratch my head because I do not believe electric vehicles are the solution for our environment. I don't believe that electric vehicles are the solution for the consumers in the United States. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that electric vehicles offer enough from a manufacturing perspective to propel us into the next century or decades of success in America. But one thing I do know about electric vehicles is to produce them, you lose 60% of the manpower required to build a non-electric vehicle. There's a 60% reduction.
I've seen 30, 60. It's a big chunk right off the top.
So
right off the top of the workforce.
Here's a guy who professes to be for his union.
Yeah.
And if I'm a manufacturer with all the federal mandates on electric vehicles that previous administrations have put in, I'm not thinking that I want to drive the hardest bargain in a contract. I'm thinking that I want to start positioning my union to save jobs and membership.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my opinion, Sean Fay sold out the UAW. It's my opinion that if Pete Jokic were the UAW leader today, that contract would have been totally different and would have been more protective of the UAW membership than Sean Fay ever considered. He's radical and he gets his face in the newspaper and he got to go kiss Biden's ass and all that's great.
Mm-hmm.
He sold out his members.
Well, that's what the UAW has a history of doing. I mean, if you think about it from a business perspective, if I'm Ford, do I want to make a good deal for 50,000 people? Or are there maybe 5 negotiators I need to take care of? A lot easier to do that. A lot cheaper too. And so that kind of thing. And then, but Sean Fain, to me, different kind of cat. To me, it's not about money for him. It's about power. He wants to be in the middle of the mix. He can't be president, so he wants to be something we haven't really had, a global labor leader.
See, he's a socialist organizer then. He's not
the rich. You're not talking about prosperity for your members. That's what Walter Reuther, the guy we have a freeway named after, he talked about prosperity for his members, not how many days off do we get. Back then, the conversation was not about 4-day work weeks. It was about how much overtime can I get my guys at what rate. It was about prosperity. It was not about this kind of degrowth mentality. And I think when you look at the Democrats, who the unions are aligned with, they're very much business negative.
Yeah.
They view farming, let alone heavy industry, as drawing down on the environment, not providing resource to safeguard the environment. And so that degrowth mentality that maybe we should be doing less business overall, that's also seeped into their thinking. So there's probably as big a divide as we've ever seen between what a UAW member wants and would benefit from and what Sean Fain does and wants to talk about.
How do the various groups in Michigan come together collectively to change the direction of the state? Because I'm telling you that our leadership is taking us down the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Michigan. We can all point to shining examples that are small, that make us feel good, that make us feel proud. But at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
Detroit, one of the 3 poorest cities in America, when it used to be one of the 3 wealthiest cities in America. Working class population declining. People move out because they don't see a future.
Right.
Overregulated, overtaxed, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
No commitment to anything from our people in Lansing other than to the establishment. And that may include union establishment. It may include organizational establishment. Say what you will about Donald Trump. Here's what I believe that guy does every day. He gets out of bed and says, I am trying to make America better.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't agree with Donald Trump all the time. In fact, I
You
vehemently
should never
disagree
agree with any man.
Well, any
People say,
man,
"Oh,
any
I'm a
woman. I don't
Trump
agree with my
this,
wife all the time.
I don't agree with me all the time.
Exactly. And we try and put these people into silos.
Yeah.
You're a MAGA guy. No,
Mhm.
I'm not a MAGA guy.
Mhm.
Unless a MAGA guy is for everyone in America. And what's wrong with being for America? This fly poop and pepper mentality that we're gonna look for things to complain about, and we're gonna express opinions on things that we don't understand.
Mhm.
Drives me nuts.
I see it every day on Twitter, and I saw it this week when John James announced he was going to run for governor. And so Mike Rogers kind of pre-announced last week, released it to a few people. John James officially announced this week. And then what followed immediately? The avalanche. The avalanche. And I cultivate a very conservative following, and I like to think I cultivate a smart following. But what I see is that we are staring a 2026 loss in the face, absent a change in mentality. And the mentality right now is what Michigan Republicans do. I realized this as I saw people talk about John James. We like to complain about the Republican during the race and complain about the Democrat after they're elected. I saw what happened with Mike Rogers last year and Alyssa Slotkin. A lot of people might have thought, oh, well, Mike Rogers is FBI and she's CIA. They're both security state. What does it matter if we choose one or the other? Well, now you see there really is a difference between the two.
Well, elections do have consequences.
Elections do have consequences. And so the idea that if someone is not 99% in alignment with myself, I'm better off just having a Democrat is prevalent. And I don't think people even put it into words, but in effect, it's what they're saying. That if you're not the exact person I want, I might as well sit it out. And so we have the weird kind of party where our supposed diehards are the ones who are constantly threatening to not vote. It's not a winning formula. Donald Trump won by not just turning out his diehards, but by cultivating the low propensity voter, someone who does not think about voting every 2 to 4 years.
Well, I find it funny because Michigan went Trump.
Yeah.
And candidly, I worked my fanny off for Trump. And I worked my fanny off for Mike Rogers. And my biggest disappointment in the election was Mike losing. But traditional Republican breakpoints, abortion, have to be 100% pro-life. Donald Trump wasn't. And all the Trumpsters supported him.
Yeah.
The purity test of, oh my God, you could never be divorced or you could never be this.
Absolutely.
All of a sudden, that purity test was ignored for Donald Trump. The envy test, and I heard it when I ran, oh, I'm a rich white guy from people. I don't make excuses or apologize for the success that I achieved. And the people who think that it was given to me, you know what? Pound sand, because I earned what I have. And I'm proud of my business record. And all that envy when it came to Donald Trump.
This man has a gold-plated penthouse.
I'll tell you.
And people think he's more of a man of the people than if he wore a leather UAW jacket and chomped on a cigar.
What is that? Talk to me.
And I'm glad you mentioned Trump, because that's what's driving that dynamic I mentioned. Essentially, the Michigan Republican voter has made Trump the enemy of the good. And so Trump is the enemy of the good people who actually live in your state, who actually are willing to stick their neck out at great cost of expense, time, energy, time away from your family, time on the road, not to eat our great restaurants in Michigan, but to go on knock on doors and ask for votes. Who wants to do that? who wants to leave their house and leave their town to do that. It takes exceptional people to even enter the realm of politics. And essentially, we're saying, you're not exceptional enough. You're not a carbon copy of Donald Trump.
Well,
So
nobody's
that's
a
not
carbon
good
copy
enough.
of Donald Trump.
And that's the mistake, is taking the most exceptional figure we've ever seen in politics and setting that as the floor against which every Michigan Republican should be compared against. There's not some Donald Trump who lives in Michigan and has billions of dollars and has been cultivating a media image for years and years and been on TV and that was a one-timer. And even at the national level, when they talk about who might follow Trump, it's a guy like J.D. Vance who couldn't be more different. So stop looking for the carbon copy and start looking for the fighter. You want a fighter? Look for the fighter within yourself. Look for the fighter within the people we send. Judge them by those standards. Take bits and pieces of the traits. But if you need them to act exactly like the man or to even be the man, we're going to lose.
Yeah. A path forward is really, really tough to see in 26. No disrespect to the Democrats, but I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Republican candidates. And let's talk about right now the potential. Mike Rogers, Tudor Dickson. Your thoughts?
Is Tudor a politician? Is Tudor Dickson a politician? I don't know that. I couldn't tell it last time from when she ran. I mean, she lost quite considerably.
Second largest loss in the history of the Republican
And I loved
Party.
how she performed in those debates. She said a lot of things that needed to be said to Gretchen Whitmer, who has tiny ears and doesn't spend any time around people who challenge her. And so that, I felt like during those debates, she was speaking for the 5 million of us on the red side of Michigan. But when you say I might run for one of two races, again, the two birds in the bush, what you're really telling me is that you're not serious about anything. Being one of 100 senators is very different than being the chief executive of the state of Michigan. And if you don't know which one you don't want either. So I don't see a race. I see the guy I'm excited about, in addition to Rogers. Look, Mike Rogers is a guy, I would say that Michigan politicians are not skilled on the whole. And that's why our politicians never matter nationally. Because when you look at Lansing is a very amateur environment. You're not going to produce pros from an amateur environment. It's like the Mud Hens. We don't have the Yankees here. We have the Mud Hens. And so, like, when you see Gretchen Whitmer try to peek her head out on the national stage, she's a clown. She doesn't have the requisite skills to do it because you can't build those skills in Lansing. So we don't have skilled politicians on the whole, but I would say Alyssa Slotkin is probably the most skilled. This is a woman who isn't trying to do it with her looks. She's just trying to do it with her ideas and her ability to connect to people. And even she swallowed a lot of pride last election cycle. By the time people were casting votes, Slotkin was damn near wearing a sheriff's badge in her commercials and saying she was going to round up illegals personally so as to deport them. I don't see a Democrat with that skill in that race now. So to me, when you look at how close that race was, and Rogers, was 20,000 votes from a win against our best politician in Michigan, why couldn't he do it this time against someone like a Mallory McMorrow or Haley Stevens, who has no appeal to independents, and they also don't have the humility Slotkin did to act like they do?
Agreed. I don't even begin to understand why it's a difficult decision as to who we should support.
Especially after last time. All those people who had complaints about Mike Rogers, ask them this now. Who would you rather have be in the Senate? Would you rather have Mike Rogers be in the Senate right now helping Trump enact his agenda, or Alyssa Slotkin, who, shockingly, is not the moderate she claimed to be?
Yeah. Let's move on to governor. currently, we've got John James, who was announced.
Yeah.
We've got Mike Cox, who may or may not have announced. I don't know.
He's in that pre-announcement exploratory. I call it purgatory. He's an exploratory purgatory right now.
Exploratory purgatory. We've got Eric Nesbitt, who's announced. We've got Perry Johnson, who is purportedly going to announce again. And you're sitting across from a guy who may or may not put his name in the hat. So I'm really interested, totally unfiltered. Let's go through your analysis.
Yeah.
Let's start with John James.
John James. I think when I think about who could be governor, I think about types, right? To me, John James could be a type of Jim Blanchard, and do a little bit of typology on these ones. I see a type of Jim Blanchard.
Help
It's an
me
extremely
understand.
unusual career path for someone to want to go from success in Washington to want to go back to Lansing. Anyone who's ever been to the two cities would know Washington's a much better place than Lansing, much more beautiful, much more power, much more money. And so it just sounded odd, especially, James never had a Lansing phase. It's not like he started there. This would be his first time there. He'd still have to pull out the map and learn his way around a little bit. So yeah, there is a historical model for John James, and it's Jim Blanchard, who won 2 terms as governor and ran for a third. So at first it didn't make sense to me, given the difference between the two cities. If I had my druthers, and there's a reason nobody asked me, but if I had my druthers, I would have had James run for the Senate seat because it's also a federal office. He's coming off 2 wins to counteract the 2 Senate losses. And unlike those, he would be running without not against an incumbent this time. He ran Gary Peters in 2020 closer than Donald Trump ran Joe Biden in Michigan. So there's reason to believe James could have done that. He chose this one, a different type of statewide race. So history says it could be done. I view Eric Nesbitt as a type of John Engler. You come through the Senate and you learn how Lansing is done. I would also say Whitmer was a type of John Engler. That same path. We don't really have lieutenant governors become governor, but senator seems something we're comfortable with, state senator. So history says it can be done, and history says you don't have to live in one of the 3 populated counties, Wayne, Oakland, or Macomb, to do it. Whitmer didn't. Engler didn't. It could be done. Nesbitt could do it. Mike Cox. Mike Cox is interesting to me because his whole career in politics predated the Trump era. So at once, he's a guy who's won 2 statewide races and an unknown. In the rap community, they call a guy in that situation the most known unknown. He's kind of the most known unknown. But he makes clean cuts in his arguments. He knows exactly what he's doing. But how do you map onto the Trump world at a time when most people would be learning your name for the first time? So him I see as a type of Rick Snyder. He was an insider at one point, but he'd been outside so long that he looks more like an outsider. Those times, that time outside of politics, he was able to earn enough money to give himself $1 million to explore this run for governor. So now you have business experience, law enforcement experience, government experience, 1 statewide races. So imagine if Rick Snyder came into 2010 having won 2 statewide races prior. Very intriguing there. Name ID is going to be his challenge, but it was for Snyder too, and he was able to overcome Cox, Mike Bouchard, like Pete Hoekstra, known Michigan politicians, because when people were listening, his message resonated. Who else do we got?
Perry.
I'd put him in the Tudor Dickson category. Let's see Perry make a ballot for once in Michigan, and then I'll be able to assess him. I would say his inability to have made a ballot indicates that maybe politics is not his passion. Maybe quality control and that interest doesn't extend to how he carries himself when he runs a race. I was taught how you do anything is how you do everything. So I would tend to think that that's not going to work out too well.
And then you got, if you choose, analyze me if I throw my hat in.
Who is Kevin Rinke? What can he do for me? Is he willing to do what it takes to become known? Is he willing to fight these battles? You know, what gets Kevin Rinke out of bed?
Are you asking?
Yeah. These are the things I need to know to make that informed choice. What makes Kevin Rinke think he can run a state of 10 million people?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because anybody who thinks they can do it, or says that they can do it without a bit of a quiver in their voice,
could be accused of overconfidence.
Is an absolute BSer.
Right.
And, Kevin Rinke is a funny anomaly because don't like politicians, don't like politics. I like right and wrong. I love people and I love my state. And what motivated me to get involved last time is it's my belief that the people of Michigan have been forgotten at every single level. And that saddens me. The Midwestern culture, the pride, the ability to help your neighbor, to love one another. And that may sound crazy to people, but to love across racial, ethnic, religious lines is part of what has made America great, is part of what has made Michigan great. And I think we've lost that. We talk about Detroit being on a comeback, and the floor of what a comeback looks like in Detroit is so low that who doesn't come back? The citizens of Detroit. And that saddens me.
Yeah.
I look at our children and I say, they can't read, they can't write, they can't do arithmetic. They aren't prepared right now to be anything other than a ward of the state. And that's not acceptable.
Which is, to me, the goal. I remember I
government
graduated
school might be to make them wards of the state.
2002, and I still got an education. From what I can see and from what parents can tell from, who were able to hear what their kids were being taught during COVID, school is more like a re-education these days.
Yeah.
It's more, here's what you should think about these certain things. It's more, you're being groomed into either queer theory or a future as a sign-holding protester.
For $20 an hour.
That's it. And that's exactly it. And so, and what they want, they don't want critical thinkers. Remember when we thought once upon a time that the left was smart or smarter? They're not. What was the last Democrat you encountered who read a book?
Well, Gretchen.
I was actually at a coffee shop with a friend.
Gretchen just wrote one.
They left. They ran out of the coffee shop in fear that I would actually open the book in their presence, because then they'd be exposed to something other than the talking points they get in their email on a daily basis, which are used in lieu of thought. So the left has gotten very shallow and very stupid, which means there's a marketplace opportunity.
Yeah.
Because my thought is, if people could be convinced to believe communist propaganda carried out by lazy and stupid people, why couldn't they believe my propaganda carried out by smarter and more thoughtful people?
Yeah.
And so that's what we have to put to the test. We have to offer not just, here's what I'll stop, here's what I'll not do. And to me, that's the difference between Trump and any prior Republican, is that for literally 70 years now, since the first issue of National Review in 1955, and that first editorial, standing athwart history yelling, stop. What's wrong with that phrase? Sounds like you're the passenger on that train. Maybe you're sitting there pinky up and you just don't want it to be a rocky ride. Maybe you'll object if you feel like the conductor's headed into dangerous territory. And for 70 years, that was the frame. And you could even go back further than that. I mean, the reason Bill Buckley thought that in the early 50s is because that's how FDR had run the country since the early 30s. Democrats do, Republicans try to stop. And so the Eisenhower, when you look at his lifetime, the Eisenhower years were really just a blip in that ongoing mentality, where Democrats are the visionaries and Republicans just try to stop them. So what made Trump 2024 so fascinating is that it's the first conservatism that's not just reactionary.
He actually has a vision.
Yeah, and when you think about even the history of the Republican Party, roots, anti-slavery party. So not necessarily here's what we're for, but here's what we're against. Then it's next zenith after that, anti-communist party, which is great. It's important. But again, it's what you're against, not what you're for. America First is the first one to say, I'm for you guys. Whether you believe it, whether it actually happens that way, it's the first attempt at it. And I got to think it won't be the last.
You know what? That's a really cool comparison, because what I find and what I found when I ran for governor last time was we weren't proactive, we were reactive.
Absolutely.
And when the press asked us questions, we were reacting.
Mm-hmm.
And
act, don't react.
Exactly.
Act, don't react.
Speak your truth.
Absolutely.
And that's something that, interestingly enough, you have to learn, and that Donald Trump's excellent at. He can get asked about question A, and he goes to D.
Absolutely.
And he does it with a smile on his face.
He doesn't accept their worldview.
Yep.
And that's another first, is that I think the ultimate Trump effect, at least in mentality, will be to repeal FDR. Because every Republican sense, they didn't say, let's repeal FDR. They said, can I run that program better? More conservative. No, you can't.
Yeah.
Because there's a reason it didn't exist at one point in time. It's because it doesn't need to. Look at the Department of Education.
Yeah, it's been quite the spin to make FDR the great leader.
And the Democrats, I mean, they don't like racism, right? What about Japanese internment? What was that? So literally every icon from their past. Oh, so you like Andrew Jackson, the Trail of Tears. Are you serious? You like FDR? You like FDR and the internment of the Japanese? Those weren't internships. That was internment. And then, you look at all of these Democrats ever since who've wrapped themselves in abortion. So you have the pro-slavery party become the pro-internment party. They've been pro every war we've ever had, including the Iraq War. And now they're the abortion party. These are the people we're struggling to beat. It's because of a lack of courage on our part, not any messaging genius on theirs.
Again, I think we've been reactionary versus proactive. Can a Republican win in 26?
Yes.
Talk to me how. What's the path forward?
Here's something Garrett, your boy Garrett Soldano and I, we actually did a little autopsy recently on 2022 to understand what happened.
I didn't see it, so.
Well, it's must see. I'll make sure to send it to you. But basically, what I've concluded about 2022 is that James Craig or no James Craig, when you look at the totality of that ballot, when you look at governor incumbent, secretary of state incumbent, attorney general incumbent, all of the same party, and every ballot measure, all three ballot measures around them are Democrat favoring. So that's like a double trifecta. So in a sense, you could say that the 2022 election was lost in 2018. I argue that no Republican, including James Craig, could have overcome the totality of the ballot. Because when you look at every ballot measure and all the statewide incumbents, how does a Republican fight that tide? There's a reason John James was the only Republican that day on election night 2022 who had a good day. And so To me, that's why 2026 is so important, because it's our first time since 2018 that we've had a clear slate where we have governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and now a Senate seat. And we all thought we were going to look at 2026 and be up against Gary Peters. So now you have 4 statewide opportunities that are wide open. You also have the ability to influence the ballot with ballot measures. Brian Posthumus, he wants to, to secure the vote, lock out illegals from the election booth, voter ID without loophole. We were told we were going to get that, and they created the biggest loophole you've ever seen.
Crazy, wasn't it?
And so when you look at the totality of the ballot, if those measures make the ballot, if that were to make the ballot, I can't believe no one's talking about right to work. That would be a perfect one for the ballot. The fact that no one's talking about right to work probably indicates 2026 is going to be a problem, because that means there's not enough courage to get things done, or not enough knowledge about whence we just came a few years ago. So you need ballot measures, and you need 4 good candidates. That's the path to success. And I'll work on the messaging end and hurting these cats and these factions. But bottom line is, the way I look at 2026, it's a loser leaves town match for us. There's no way on earth that if Democrats run Michigan from 2019 to 2035, because we re-elect our incumbents in Michigan, if a Democrat holds the executive office in Michigan for 16 years, there won't be a Michigan on the 17th year. This is it.
I actually believe that this is the litmus test for Michigan.
Yeah.
And that it's why, forget about my experience, it's whoever the candidate is needs to be more of a businessman, needs to be more of someone who is willing to completely restructure. It's going to be the 4 toughest years in the history of our state, because we have so many cracks, so many leaks, so many bolts that need to be tightened, that if you don't have somebody like Trump who appears to get out of bed and is willing to fight every single day.
And they have to know it's a fight. So look, we had Rick Snyder for 8 years. He didn't fundamentally change Michigan because he didn't view that as his job. And so...
what are your thoughts on Rick? Talk to me. Did you like Michigan more after his 8 years?
So Rick Snyder was sandwiched between 2 lost decades. So was it better by lack of having a woman governor? Absolutely. Was it better? Was it good? Yeah, we got right to work. But even then, Snyder had to be almost dragged kicking and screaming into doing right to work. Said it was not on his agenda. Some friends were able to show him video where he actually said, hey, if the unions try to push a right to work initiative and it fails, then I will sign it. And only then, when he realized that he was consistent with his prior self, did he sign it. So if you're making that decision based on personal ego and not what benefits the 10 million of Michigan, I think that's an odd choice. I think continuing the corporate welfare consensus from Jennifer Granholm and not what we want is someone who's going to grab the cookie jar and dash it into 1,000 pieces. Not who says, I'm going to run it better this time. Honest. And so...
you cannot run this, what we have, better. This is a failure.
It is designed to be corrupt.
Yes.
Lansing, I want whoever we send to Lansing to have a healthy distaste for Lansing. I don't like when someone like a Rick Johnson, the former House Speaker, guy comes from Leroy, Michigan, and Leroy, if there's a transcript, Leroy actually has a capital L. Little Leroy, Michigan with the capital R. A guy from Leroy, Michigan becomes House Speaker, and instead of taking his talents back to humble Leroy, decides to remain in Lansing and become a politico and eventually wind up in federal prison because he was a marijuana regulator and got his hand in the cookie jar. So I want someone who has the character to not be swayed or fascinated by the Lansing swamp?
If a Republican governor, a butt-kicking governor, gets in, how is the Republican legislature going to respond?
Well, I think about the right to work thing. I mean, that was lawmakers doing it. And then, kind of the whole movement had to get Snyder on board. It would be nice if the energy came from the executive rather than having to be brought to the executive, and at which point it'll be weighed and maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't happen. You have to have someone who doesn't just view it as their job to run the thing that exists. Democrats love talking about fundamental change. We all know Lansing is a bad city. We all know it's a corrupt place, which means that the problems are systematic. We give out $1 billion in legislative earmarks per year. Matt Hall, the House Speaker, he was talking about, I'm going to make you put your name on it and attach yourself to our requests. I got a better idea, Matt. Why don't we just get rid of earmarks altogether?
100%. Politicians like to try things. And that's always slow death.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the issues that a Republican runs on, that a butt-kicking governor runs on, that he puts into effect in Michigan to start to change Michigan? Give me the 5 top issues in your mind.
Well, I would say election integrity is a good one to jump on. We see Jocelyn Benson. I mean, we had a state where I think Ruth Johnson was saying in her last year of Secretary of State, there was maybe 54 new voters who registered. So this was 2018. There was 54 voters who registered that year whose social security numbers didn't match the 4-digit number. They were invalid. Last year in 2024, there was 35,000 such people. So we have massive election integrity issues. And by the way, you may have read about Jocelyn Benson's review of election records and that says we had 16 people, 16 illegals vote last year. Yeah, that's not what happened. That review it compared 2024 voting records versus a single database that has known non-citizens on it.
Yeah.
So that's not to say that those were the only 16. It's that those were the only 16 there. It's very different than saying I proved definitely that all 5.7 million people who voted are citizens except for those 16. She didn't say that because she couldn't say that because that's not what actually happened. So election integrity, get on board with those ballot measures, I think would be a huge one. I think right to work, we're missing the boat. Union leadership is so poor character and what they say is so alarming that I can't imagine any worker wants to be tied or wants their fate tied to a guy like Shawn Fain. So let's disconnect that. And by the way, if you're trying to make that case, so the very month right to work repeal was signed in Michigan, it was like maybe 14 days later, in I want to say February 2023. That same month, he didn't even wait a month. That same month, Shawn Fain puts out a thing saying, now the UAW is going to focus, I think, $40 million over 3 years to expand into the southern United States. So just as quick as we're tied at the neck to this guy exclusively, he decides he wants to see others. And so how much attention is your Michigan UAW member going to get from a guy who's so globally focused and so expansion focused? So right to work is another one. I would say property tax abolition. I think that's probably a longer game. I don't know if that happens next year, but it needs to happen. I don't know about 2 others.
What about personal income tax?
Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah, eliminate it. There was actually a time before which Michigan had an income tax. That was a Romney idea. The fact that it was a George Romney idea and what we've learned about the Romneys ever since should be ample reason to eliminate that. So that's 4.
Yeah.
And here's the thing:
Fifth one's got to be line 5, man.
you only need one.
Well,
But you only need one. And like to me, when I think about that election last year, it was not any policy position, I think, that won it. I think about all the times I'd have someone over on Saturday or Sunday or watching football. Next thing you know, that commercial comes on. Harris is for they, them. Trump is for you. People who couldn't tell you the score of the game that they just watched remembered that. So I think a simple message, I think that's why I think the voting thing, I think that could be enough. When you look at Whitmer's history, 2018, there was, I think, 3 ballot measures that year too, but the one that mattered the most to me was legal pot. That drove people, and that drove her into the office. 2022, abortion. That drove people. And so it doesn't have to be 10 things. It needs to be one good one.
with a really good candidate.
Yeah.
With a really good candidate.
And heck, as we've seen with Whitmer, it doesn't even need to be a good candidate. It just can't be an obviously bad candidate. And they can't be. So if 2022, there's nothing anyone could have done. Okay. But 2018, Bill Schuette is someone I like personally, but he got boat raced. And in a year where that seat was open, that was the most winnable that was ever going to be.
What is boat raced mean?
Oh, come on. You're not a boat guy?
I am a boat guy, but I don't know what boat race means.
He got beat to point B.
Got it.
Significantly.
Got it.
He got boat raced. And so we need someone who has that personality. I've heard it said that facts don't care about your feelings. And I would suggest that that's the exact opposite of how the world works. Feelings don't care about your facts. If you feel that there's a recession, think about last election. Everyone clearly knew the country was cratering, and here was the media with all of their alleged credibility telling you that things were great. And you trusted your lying eyes and not them.
Yeah, that drives me nuts.
Yeah.
I happen to be...
They're trying to convince you of things. That never works.
Well, you can call it the Potomac two-step. You can call it the Lansing two-step.
Mm-hmm.
Gretchen comes out the other day and says, I'm no real estate agent, but I think Michigan property's a really good buy. And homes are cheap in Michigan. What she's not really saying is that her screwed up policies have made real estate values decline.
Yeah, people are so desperate that they'll sell you their house for whatever price is what she means.
They're just trying to get out.
Right.
And
holy cow. And for her to think of that as a positive, this is why Indiana has you as Realtor of the Year, Gretch.
It is beyond me the stuff that people come up with.
Yeah.
I fundamentally have a problem saying that it's okay to choose someone who is unqualified, and because they are unqualified, they are unpredictable. We don't know who we're voting for. And we elect these people, and it's part of the reason I think Lansing's a mess. Mm-hmm. We elect people who maybe the best paying job in their life will be Lansing.
Bingo.
And
you want someone ideally who was taking a pay cut to go to Lansing.
You damn well better be giving something up to serve people.
Yeah. Well, we saw what happens with a Bill Clinton where, think about contrast to Bill Clinton to Donald Trump. So Bill Clinton made the most money and got the most laid as president. Donald Trump became president to not get laid and make less money. It's something we've never seen someone sacrifice. This guy's probably lived the most chaste decade of his life, this last decade, at the height of his wealth, because he sacrificed that to do this for us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, again, I go back to, I want a candidate who's really given something up. And different things motivate different people. And this is about 2026. And we talked about a little bit about putting forth the right candidate. And without identifying people so far by name, we've got a politician, an ex-politician who wants to be a politician again, a business guy whose strength was quality, who in his political runs has shown nothing but bad quality,
Right.
but seems to be striving for significance. That's not a good pool for me, man.
No, and Perry needs to talk to Sri Thanadar. You know, it is actually possible to buy yourself a seat in Michigan.
I don't think you can buy the governor's seat.
Perry just hasn't been able to do it. And that's the thing. Sri ran for governor in 2018. He actually won the city of Detroit over Whitmer in 2018. And I think from there, didn't he go to the legislature and then to Congress? Start with something you can win. Start with something you can do. And so to me, if it really is about service, you probably, set your target a little bit lower to something more achievable. Why don't you get a win? Why don't you let us see you in an office, or at least see your name on a ballot? We haven't even seen this guy's name on a ballot yet.
Yeah. So, personal perspective, I think you give up to serve, that you take a pay cut to serve, that when you truly want to accomplish something, you don't strive for the position and the power, for the notoriety, but you strive for it because you have very specific ideas and goals. And candidly, that's what I liked about my candidacy. I look at people and say, what's in it for me? I look at my business acumen. I look at my results. I look at my commitment to the everyday working person in the state of Michigan, to the kids. And I say, show me that same conviction and show me that same level of selflessness, because failure is not an option on any of the items that I bring up. Education, got to be fixed. And there are solutions that exist that will fix public education. That's going to kick some ass. And there are going to be a lot of people upset about it, but change is uncomfortable.
The teachers'
and I don't
unions
care
need
if
to be
the
made
teachers'
uncomfortable.
union.
That's exactly it.
I don't give a darn about the teachers' union being uncomfortable. You know what I care about? Your kids being educated. And what's my definition of that? Reading age literacy.
Yes.
Mathematical skills, civics skills, the basics, nothing fancy. I don't give a darn about the iPad or the fancy football field if your kid's dumb. I want smart kids.
And that's the thing. We've focused so much on I got to have the whiteboard and the accoutrements. And
that's all crap.
Parents demand it. And it's about everything except the education of the child.
How about not only educating the kids in K through 12, but having an educational system that prepares people for the technological jobs of today, the technological jobs of the future that Michigan needs to build back the middle class? Because I got to tell you, auto manufacturing in Michigan isn't dead yet, but it's dying.
Well, it's being killed off.
It's
being
dying.
killed off. And so if we literally stopped doing all the things, there's I think it was
we better come up with a replacement. Is what I'm
study,
getting at.
Through the University of Michigan, basically found the faster you do EV adoption, the faster you go, the worse it is for Detroit and the better it is for China.
Oh, absolutely.
And we've decided, we have a governor who wants there to be 2 million EVs on Michigan roads. What is this, 2025, 5 years from now?
She's nuts.
5 years from now.
EVs are not the solution.
And brings in Chinese companies to even do this. So we have policies that are actively anti-Detroit and pro-China. So it's literally, and this is where the Republican governance, even if it's not the best person, comes in. I don't need you to do anything special per se. Just stop doing the stupid stuff.
But you know what? Whoever ends up being governor, I'm going to talk to all the union members out there, and I think they are good people. And I think they need better representation. But for all you union members out there, if you're driving an EV, you're killing yourself. You're shooting yourself in the head. You know, there are 1,850 more parts on a hybrid vehicle than there is on an electric vehicle. All those parts need to be manufactured. All those parts represent an opportunity for the state of Michigan and for you union members to be employed in going to work and doing something productive.
And I don't want anyone who's watching this to get it confused. We're not saying that there's one type of car to build.
No.
We're saying the government should stop the favoritism of the thing that lops off 1/3 of your workforce right off the top. Stop the favoritism, because if it was just left to the market, we wouldn't be talking about EVs. When's the last time you heard someone talk about autonomous vehicles?
EVs
rarely.
failed.
Yeah.
This is a folly, and it is government dependent on subsidies.
Absolutely. Even Tesla
Absolutely.
would not exist but for the government.
Absolutely.
So if we stop doing the, people talk about, but the Chinese will flood the market with how are they getting the cars here? How are they getting the cars here?
We're not doing any flooding
We don't have
anymore.
to let them do that, you know.
It's just so wrong. So we've got education, we've got manufacturing that we got to get going. We've got to rebuild Detroit. And when I say rebuild Detroit, for the people of Detroit. Yes, Stan Gilbert's done a nice job. Yes, Ishba has done a nice job. Yes, Roger Penske, the Ford family, the Illiches, you can all say they've done good things. You can also say that they have left some people behind, and that those things that they did benefited them more than they benefited the city.
Well, they all got plenty of government money.
Oh, yeah.
To do those things.
Absolutely. And that's not a criticism. They're playing the game, but it's the reality of it. It always gets me cranked up when, if you constructively criticize, if you factually look at the state of Michigan and you say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. The left in particular says, all you want to do is tear things down. I had a post this morning, and I said, God, I want better education. I want lower taxes. And I want a better work environment. And the responses were, what are you, you crazy elitist? And you know, none of which benefit me, by the way. Okay.
And none of which evinces that they read your post.
So
they're just blurting out stuff, not even in response.
Just hatred.
Yeah.
So then I said, okay, how about this? I want worse education. I want higher taxes, and I want a shitty work environment. And the left was like, oh, wait a minute. Is that what I was just, to your point.
And that's what we got to do, is walk them into those traps.
Absolutely. You know, the hypocrisy. We need people who have nothing to gain by being put in office and saying, I'm going to fix this fricker. And it's just that simple. And I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to leave because this environment is so repulsive to me.
George Washington style, you know, go to Mount Vernon. You should have something, you should have some place you want to be that's not Lansing. Any governor I would elect, I would hope. I mean, there are some people in Lansing, Whitmer's from Lansing, but for the most part, that should be a place you visit and never get too comfortable.
I hate to say it, but there's more Botox in Lansing than brains these days. And it's cost us.
Mm-hmm.
And for Michigan to get ahead, you had the lost decade
Mm-hmm.
with Jennifer Granholm. And I happen to think that Rick did a damn good job of putting a plug in the leaks. And then Gretchen comes in.
Mm-hmm. Oh, she grabbed that plug right out of there.
She pulled the plug out. And the problem is in 26, if Donald Trump was governor of Michigan, success would be putting the plug back in, and undeterminable as to where are we going and how are we going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
We need someone who's got vision, who's got a stiff spine, and who can influence the legislators enough that when they are gone, that the cats don't start, or the chickens don't start running the hen house again.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And our bench on the Republican side is weak. We've got some really nice people. We've got people that profess to be good politicians. I'm tired of politicians, man. I am tired of excuses. I'm at a stage in my life where I don't give a shit. I have the ability to either do something or to step aside and to step out. And not everybody has that. And, that saddens me. Because if there's one thing that I'd like for Michigan, is that everybody would actually have a choice to say, I want to be here, I want to make a difference, or I can pack up and move my family out because I don't want to put up with this
it's just
BS.
the opposite. A lot of the people here feel like
they're trapped.
Are trapped. And then so many of the people who leave felt like they were forced to leave.
Yeah.
Whenever I asked, like, we used to start every interview on the Enjoyer podcast asking people, what do you enjoy about Michigan? And everyone's answer always circles back to family at some point. Almost nobody just moves here. You move here because of a girl, a boy, their family. Someone's family is why you move here. There's a reason something like 76% of people in Michigan were born in Michigan. And so when you take a state that has that high percentage of native-born people, and we're the ones who leave, that means every time one of us leaves, some people are always going to leave.
Yeah.
But that means in a lot of cases, these are people being forced to leave who would not leave if they had a viable choice of staying. And that our state pushes out so many people saddens me. And I feel like 2026 is really our last chance to fix it.
I agree. I said it previously. Government in Michigan feeds its citizens scraps, and it calls it filet.
Mm-hmm.
And I want a governor or a government that's going to start serving the good stuff to the people, not to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Those days need to go away quickly because Michigan is unique. It is special. It has a spirit and a history that instead of being frowned on, we should draw our strength from, and we should move it forward, and we don't need to accept anything less. And it's okay to be angry about it. It's okay to be focused about it. And we need people who say, maybe it's one thing, like you said, James, earlier, or maybe it's 5 things.
That all reach one person, but as long as it's enough to get those people, I mean, the left usually will do 3 ballot initiatives a year.
Yeah.
So we could have, if everyone does 3, we could have 6.
Yeah.
And so which are the 3 that are going to be the most powerful? I need people to set aside their reasons why not and tap into their reasons why. I heard a lot of people say last year, I would crawl over broken glass to vote for Donald Trump. Can't say I've ever heard someone from Michigan say that about their own family. Maybe
I'll
that's
say
the
it right
problem.
now.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll go through bullets. I'll go through glass. I'll go through fire for my people.
And that's the mentality that leads to a win in 2026. Because then it's not about a perfect candidate. It's about stopping the bleeding. It's about getting someone in there who's not going to be actively part of the problem.
And we got a problem.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for the time today.
Thank you.
This is the first time that we have sat down together. I have actually been in a room and listened to you previously.
Really?
Yeah. Years ago. Years ago. And continue to be impressed. I thank you for your perspective.
Thank you.
Your candor, and your willingness to put forth the effort to make Michigan a better place. Because at the end of the day, it's who we are.
Yeah.
It's what we are.
That's what I always say. I'm not leaving. You're not leaving. So let's figure it out.
Yep. I'm looking forward to working with you.
Absolutely.
I got to tell you, one of the most inspiring conversations I've had in a long time. And I am grateful for that. I hope that you see the commitment that he has to the state of Michigan. I hope that you can cut through your own personal echo chambers to do what is right. Because, man, Michigan needs help. And I don't care if that's a popular statement. Michigan needs help. And it needs focus. And it needs you being willing to sacrifice something for the betterment of the whole instead of just looking at your personal issue. Let's do it. 26 is an opportunity. God bless you. Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in to Beyond the Echo. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop us a comment and share the podcast with your friends. Stay connected and keep the conversation going by following us on social media. Until next time, keep exploring beyond the echo.